Hello and welcome to the August 10th weekly JupyterLab call. Today we have 13 people on the call. And if you haven't already, please check out the linked meeting minutes in the chat and add your name to the attendees list if you would like, and add an item to the agenda if there's something you'd like to discuss. If you have something to discuss that's going to take a bit more discussion, please add it at the bottom in the section called additional discussion so we can allocate a bit more time to it. But with that being said, why don't we get started? Today, the first person on the agenda is Isabella.
Hello, hello. We actually have 13 people and one cat on the call, I guess. She heard you start recording and is now here. So with that, I'm going to announce to you all the JupyterLab accessibility meeting will be 15 minutes after the scheduled end of this one. It's that week again. So yeah, I hope to see some of y'all there. Totally open and always an adventure. So thank you.
Cool, thank you. Okay, Fred, you are number 2 on the agenda.
Yeah, it's just to please you so that you are not number 2, but I'm not fully ready, so let me do it live. Just a short announcement, we have released JupyterLab 3.4.5, so it's a patch release. We have seen that there is currently a bug in the releaser, so for people using it, yeah, you may need to wait a day or two for a fix to be pushed upstream, but that's just for sharing the information. And apart from that, yeah, I wanted just to come back to discussion we had 2 weeks ago, I think, or 2 or 3 weeks ago, about the two-factor authentication enforcement on GitHub. So the discussion, like at the end of the discussion, there is 2 possibilities. Either we enforce it directly and people will get a notification from GitHub saying they've been removed, and so they could reapply if they turn on 2FA. Matches also brought the fact that it's possible to create a private discussion and to ping all of the people that don't have 2FA in that discussion. The drawback is that everybody that is in the organization will see that the list of people that don't have 2FA activated. That's the only difference, let's say. But maybe it's nicer to ping them at least first. So yeah, my question is, which solution does the people, do the people here in this call want to take? I'm happy to do either of them. It does mean pinging 70 people or just like turning on the settings on GitHub. What will anyway happen in September? That's the target goal for the security team, is to enforce 2FA in all Jupyter project by September. I don't know if there is a specific date already set, but that's the idea.
I have an opinion, but I would like to hear somebody else's before mine. Does anyone have an opinion about this?
I think it's a good idea to require 2FA and to ping people as discussed.
Okay. So I think Rick made the case for 2FA, and I think it's really sound. I think September is in 20 days. We could ping them to give them a heads up that this is happening. But I also think it's probably fine if we removed access and people enabled it and got re-added, because that's immediately more secure. But I don't have a strong feeling about it, because September is coming soon regardless. Does anyone else have any thoughts? Oh, okay, end of September, not beginning. Fair enough.
But providing the notice at the beginning saying, hey, it's September 1, do this in the next 29 days. I think that's ample notice.
Yeah. But I also think having your access removed, then that is the notification, and you simply go add because you got a decent message from GitHub is not that bad. But it seems like more people are on the gentle ping side, right? Mike said that, and Jason says that, and no one else is saying remove immediately.
So okay, then
Oh,
I
look
ping.
at that. We got a 2-on-2. Alex agrees with me. More secure, more now. Anyone else have an opinion? All right, how about this? Is there anyone on the call who doesn't have 2FA on their GitHub? Because you're all active. One of you might get kicked out if you don't have it. Okay, if I ask the opposite question, would I get a whole bunch of thumbs ups, or you guys just not listening? That's what I really want to know.
So,
Sweet. Cool.
so I think everybody that's here has it. I did not download the last version, like the up-to-date list, but I think everybody that's here has it.
Okay. All right. So, I mean, because there's not clear agreement here, maybe we should take the nicer route and try the private discussion that Matthias is proposing.
Yeah, okay, then I'll do that. And can I buffer you, Hashin, to read after me the text, just to be sure that
Oh, yeah, sure.
English would be okay.
Of course.
Okay, that was all for me. Thanks.
Okay, so next person is me on the agenda. I have 2 links here. One is to a project board that I made in the JupyterLab org for Lumino 2. And there are a bunch of issues that are in progress. There's a bunch that nobody's working on, and there's a bunch that are done. So far, primarily, it has been fairly straightforward things, but some of them are a bit more complex than I initially imagined, which is why I'm asking for help. Fred has been helping, and that's really helpful and really reassuring because I've been a bit overwhelmed. And Gabriel's been looking, and that's really good because more is better. And so if you have any interest in working on modernizing Lumino, we are doing things like using ES6 only, which means we get a whole bunch of stuff like generators and iterators, and we get and we've upgraded the TypeScript version, so we get optional chaining, and there's a bunch of things that you used to have to bring in via lib that you now get for free because they're included in the language. We're removing a whole bunch of things that are legacy, like supporting the P-CSS styles and like the data store experiment that we ended up not using for CRDT. The piece that I'm currently working on is removing the custom Lumino iterators because at the time they were implemented, iterators were not available in all the browsers that we intended to support, but they are now. I actually have an open question about whether we need to do any browser detection because there's a platform namespace that will tell you if you're looking at IE or whatever. And I don't know if we still need that, but it's not obvious yet. So anyway, please take a look at those 2 links. Please work on these issues if you have the time. I'm happy to help anyone with any aspect of them. And it'll be a big impact thing, right? Because Lumino is the basis for JupyterLab and Notebook 7. Fred has his hand up. What's up?
First, thanks for working on that. Second, I think the code for detecting the browser, we will need to keep it because I think it's used in the keyboard shortcut thing, as far as I remember.
Cool. Yeah, no, I haven't even looked at that piece yet, so that's unsurprising, but makes sense. I wanted to ask the folks who work on accessibility if there are any sort of wish list items that require API changes to Lumino to make your lives easier, because now is the time to do it. Otherwise, we have to wait until earliest JupyterLab 5, Lumino 3, if we're modifying APIs that are backward incompatible. Write an issue in the Lumino repo if it is purely an ask. Write an issue in the Lumino repo if it's an ask and an offer to do it. And comment on a pre-existing issue if it's relevant to that. Vidar has his hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add the point that while we have an opportunity to change APIs, I still think that there should be a strong reason for changing any APIs, because any API change will have some extra work for somebody somewhere, right? So let's try not to generate work for people unless we have, unless it gives us something new, unless it enables something good or gives us performance or whatever, or it's been deprecated.
Sure. I think the main purpose of this backward incompatible major version update is to remove a lot of deprecated or duplicate or plain unused code.
Yeah, so to clarify, this was just to your last point about, this is an opportunity to change APIs if you want. So it wasn't a reply to your entire part. It was just the last point.
Sure. But even that is predicated on if there is a thing that makes the lives of people working on accessibility easier, because that's one of the directions I think we should push on for Lumino. And I'm not sure there's really anything that's backward incompatible that needs to be done. It could really be that every single widget needs to be visited and have an audit done on which components of it need to have ARIA labels, etc. Like, it's unclear that it's anything backward incompatible, but it's a good time to look. But more than anything, please help. This is a lot. And we want to do it as soon as possible, because there's going to be, as Vidar says, fallout and big chunks of JupyterLab that rely on, say, the iterators in widget.children or in data models for data grids will need to be amended. And at the very least, all the package JSONs will need to be updated. And the same goes for extensions. Yeah, Mike.
Is this change, could it be done in a backward compatible way, and could we deprecate Lumino iterators for future release instead? Drop the support.
There are some aspects that have effectively been deprecated since 2019 that we've been doing in the backward compatible way by adding 2 classes to each thing, the LM and also the P classes. There are some things that just aren't being used. The iterator stuff, I really strongly recommend not writing in a backward compatible way, because oftentimes when we have iterators, they're at performance low points to begin with. So writing some sort of shim or writing some sort of compatibility layer there seems like a mistake. And I think it's just time to use the native functionality now that we have the opportunity to. If I don't know. I mean, I don't want to unilaterally make this decision, but I'm the person working on it, so I can unilaterally decide what I want to type on the keyboard. But it is definitely the case that if it dramatically harms performance or something, then okay, maybe this is a mistake. But for the most part, I'm pretty hesitant to add another backward compatibility layer like we did 3 years ago, because it might take 3 years. Isabella.
I just wanted to verbally reply to Vidar and say, no, I think that's a really good point about not just doing things to do them. So we'll be cautious about it, but I also appreciate the flagging that some things may be being changed anyway. So thank you.
Cool, thank you. So again, please follow those links and at least take a look, because you'll see visually what is happening there. And with that, why don't we move on to Mike?
I first wanted to highlight an issue on JupyterLab desktop repo, because many of you might not be subscribed here. There was an advanced user who had not a very good first experience with the desktop distribution of JupyterLab, and they were very thoughtful and considerate with the generous with their time, because they put a very long issue describing all the steps that were difficult or not as they would have expected. So that's a huge source of knowledge for user experience understanding from coming from someone who is outside of the JupyterLab developers team. There are issues which are specific to JupyterLab desktop, such as expecting a package rather than an installer on macOS, or problems with environment selection. But there are also some rough edges in JupyterLab pointed out, which led this person to a culmination of the or expiration of the limit of patience, and they just gave up. And I also linked another story on how for some novice users, using R in JupyterLab might be difficult because it doesn't come with a different R kernel shipped by default. And taking a little bit out of this issue, but also from things that I would like to see change in JupyterLab desktop distribution, I wanted to talk about or seek feedback on two other issues. And one of them, maybe taking a step back about JupyterLab desktop. So currently there are some problems in the startup which are platform specific. So problems which appear only on Mac, for example, on Windows. And if you are a JupyterLab developer and maybe heard about JupyterLab desktop but haven't tried that, maybe that would be very helpful if you could take a look and see if you can help diagnose these issues, because well, not everyone has Mac, not everyone uses Windows, and just a collective knowledge might help that. So moving on to the other sub-points, I am proposing to expand the environment selection tile to include auto-detected environment choices for virtual environments for JupyterLab desktop. And again, because there isn't much traction, I wanted to highlight that for potential feedback. I know that some of you might push against this proposal, so that's why I'm mentioning it. And similarly, another issue is that when you open JupyterLab desktop, it operates as a global application. There is no concept of a project, which can be annoying because you often want to change the virtual environment that you are working with, and you want to have workspaces specific to different projects that you work on. And currently, because of this global specification and also some issues with how workspaces are implemented, it means that every time that you switch between projects or open two projects at a single time, you will get workspaces mixed up. And one simple proposal to resolve that would be to add a .Jupyter folder, which would store the default workspace and settings of this so-called project, which is really in line with .ipython and .vs Code, .python. So it seems like common practice, but I guess for some reason it wasn't done for many years, and maybe there are good reasons, but I just couldn't find any issue or any prior discussion on that. So I'm opening this as a proposal for a quick fix that would really solve a lot of problems for using JupyterLab in a desktop environment.
With regard to the first bullet point, that seems like a really terrible user experience somebody had. So much so that it makes me wonder if we should label JupyterLab desktop beta or something, right? If this is people's first experience with JupyterLab, I don't know. I don't want to turn them off. William, was that a, yeah?
I was just reading through the whole thing that he said. And to some extent, it's not necessarily JupyterLab desktop, but just JupyterLab that was causing him. Like, for example, he set it up and didn't have any kernels installed. And then he complained a lot about the user experience not saying, hey, you don't have any kernels. So it's the sort of thing you would have kind of irregardless of whether you're using JupyterLab desktop or just installed JupyterLab in some other way via pip. And then there's complaints, for example, about how word line wrapping works in CodeMirror compared to, say, other editors. So there's like a whole page about that, which is, again, not at all a JupyterLab desktop thing. So just my little comment is that it's labeled as JupyterLab desktop, but really almost every, or like half the things he's complaining about are general JupyterLab behaviors, which may or may not actually be a valid complaints in all cases.
Don't you get IPy kernel now if you pip install JupyterLab? Like, I thought you can't install JupyterLab without any kernels anymore.
Well,
Yes, this
his
is
point.
Go on.
His point was just that if somehow you manage to have Jupyter set up without any kernels, then Jupyter should, instead of letting you proceed to try to make a document and be really confused, it should just say, hey, you don't have any kernels. Here's some suggestions for installing one. But it's not really necessarily a Jupyter desktop specific issue, because I'm sure there's some way to get an install that doesn't have a working kernel.
Sure, yeah.
And this way is really complex interaction between macros, security policies, making a desktop application which works without an installer, and Conda installer, which creates an environment, and that it's really at odds with how macOS currently works. But I have difficulties trying to fix that, help fixing that, because I don't own a Mac. So yeah, that's really my call for anyone who might be using it to have a look, because that might be a really simple solution to the problem that many users experience.
As for your second, no, your third bullet point, the .Jupyter. So I think you're totally right about the implication that you only ever have one project, which is kind of how workspaces work, is not a good one. The saving grace of workspaces is supposed to be the different URLs, but people tend to not use URLs that way. No one goes to a separate URL because they want to load a separate project, unless they're on like a hosted environment where somebody links it to them already. So if you have ideas for how to improve this experience, I did most of the work on workspaces, and I totally concede that that was a 1.0 effort. So it's definitely like worth taking a look at. Vidar, what are you thinking?
Oh, I would just say like a drop-down selector, because when you type it by hand, you have to remember what do you have, what exists. I'm sure the API has a list workspaces endpoint. So if you just populate a dropdown or a combo box with that, then you know what's there and you can just select them with a two-click action, right?
Yeah, there's a few pieces of work that we did to get to something like this. One is, you're right, we did make an API endpoint to list workspaces for this reason. Another is we made workspaces themselves double clickable to treat as like a project file. So yeah, no, we should revisit this. We should make this better. If you have the time and inclination to work on this, Mike, please do. If you have questions about workspaces that arise that you think I might be able to answer, I'm happy to. Yeah. Any other thoughts, comments?
Quick clarification. There is an issue about Workspace's graphical user interface, and there are some designs from JupyterLab. My problem is not really that there isn't a Workspaces GUI. It's that I want to open a JupyterLab desktop in one place and have the default workspace come up automatically for that given so-called project. And I would even want to have multiple different workspaces for a given project. So it's more of a meta issue of which can be currently configured using an environment variable. So all of these problems are currently solvable for an advanced enough user, but they are solvable in command line and by writing complex JSON files. So yeah, the suggestion to make a .jupyter folder for auto detection of from where the settings should be loaded and from where the workspaces should be loaded is kind of parallel to whether there is a graphical user interface for workspaces or not.
So just some brainstorming on that. There's like for VS Code, right? There's two ways you can open a folder. You can open a blank VS Code to no folder, and then you can say open folder and you find a folder somehow, or you can create a new one or whatever, right? And then at least in Windows, for me, there's like for the shortcut for VS Code, you can just right click it, and then it's like all your last used folders are there as a thing. Those kind of things are, platform specific and might not be that easy to support via Electron. So while that is probably the best user experience, I would probably go for the first experience as a stepping stone, at least on the way that you can. Having a UI to switch once you started it up will resolve some of that, right? Even if it's not the same experience as starting up with a specific workspace.
Yes, so there are also other problems. In JupyterLab desktop, you don't have an access to the URL. You cannot create currently workspaces. But even if you had,
that's why I said if you have a UI box, you could create a new one. If you had a combo box, you could select an existing one. You could type in a new one and click enter or whatever, create new.
Yes, and in JupyterLab desktop, even if you you would have to have a way to create the new workspace somehow. So that's like another step. And currently, we can start JupyterLab desktop using jlab command in any directory from command line, or create a shortcut to do that. So that's why I think that making just a .jupyter folder as an implementation detail and a way to mark any directory or any root as a project in the JupyterLab interface would solve a lot of these problems. And then there are some more specific questions in the issue, like should it be .jupyter or should it be .JupyterLab, and how it would be organized. But I also absolutely agree with the point about having a a way to select most recently projects as a next step in the future.
Any other thoughts, comments? So this, I don't, this seems somewhat, it's different than just a normal feature, right? Because we're adding files to users' file systems that they didn't explicitly ask for, and we don't have that many other places where this happens. We have IPYNB checkpoints, for example, but that's been there for a really long time. So what I would say is that off the cuff, this seems like a good idea, and it seems like what other comparable offerings like products do, right? But we probably should talk about it a bit more, either in the issue or maybe on next week's call or something, because we do have fewer than we often have on these calls, just to get some more opinions on it. There might be something we're overlooking, some reason why no one wanted to do this at some other point, or, you know, like it just seems worth talking about a bit more. But I think generally speaking, this seems like a really good idea and one we should pursue. Does anyone disagree with that or have anything to add?
Just that the less you store in these folders, generally the better, right? So I think for VS Code, if you just open a folder, if you don't change any settings, I don't know how much stuff gets stored, right? So the fewer files that get put in it, and the less kind of code that are in it is better, right? Because some people like to put all of this on like global git ignore things or local ones or whatever. Some people like to commit these things into the repositories, right? So it's having something that is not too noisy in Git could also be useful.
The sort of things that Mike is talking about adding in there will change every single time you use it. Like a workspace file changes every single time you modify your layout. So if you do have that under,
right, but if the file only contained the workspace name, and then the actual workspace data was stored somewhere else, that's, but then you couldn't share it. So I guess that kind of defeats the point.
yeah. Yeah, okay, so let's probably discuss this some more, I think. Nonetheless, the problem you're trying to solve is a real one, and we should solve it, whatever the mechanism is. I think this probably is a sound mechanism, just given that other IDEs all have to do it. But yeah, it's probably, I'd like to hear some more people's ideas. So if you don't have anything to say right now, but this is something you care about, please chime in on that issue. Let's bring it up again next week too. And but yeah, let's head toward actually fixing this, right? Because I think it's a real use case that real users have. Okay, we don't have anything else on the agenda or additional discussions. Is there anything that you may have wanted to talk about that you didn't add here? I'll give you a chance now. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording.